Some people are afraid of silence. I'm afraid of what's hidden inside it. In this old tape recorder I wear around my neck, there's a secret many people couldn't bear to hear. The voice of the man who killed my son is recorded in here, mixed with the moans of pleasure he used to let out in my bed. That's right, I dated Caleb's murderer. I slept with him. I let him touch me with the same hands that took my boy's life. I did it all on purpose, with every one of his kisses making me want to vomit, with every caress making me bleed inside, because I needed to hear the confession from his own mouth. Perhaps you're wondering how a woman could endure that. Let me tell you, when your heart has already died with your child, your body is just a tool. You separate your soul, tuck it away somewhere safe, and leave only the empty shell behind to do what must be done. And I got it. I recorded everything, every word, every detail of how he killed my son and other young men too. And I know that, to this day, the devil is still locked up because of these tapes. My name is Eleanor Vance. I'm 71 years old and have a story that sounds like a lie, but it's more real than this scar on my left eyebrow. As I rewind this tape of my memories, tell me your name and where you're listening from in the comments. I want to know that I am not alone on this journey and that my story is being spread. But to understand the woman I became, you must first understand the woman I was. I wasn't always this person with a recorder around her neck and a heart of stone. So let me take you back to the beginning, to my life before it all fell apart. Because I wasn't always like this, you know. I was once a woman full of dreams, of hope, a mother like any other who just wanted to see her son grow up happy. It was 1992 when everything started to fall apart. Scranton, Pennsylvania, a city with strong, blue-collar, church-going roots, a place of hard work, but also a lot of poverty and hardship. A tough land, a hard life. I lived in a simple little house in the West Side neighborhood, the kind with a door and a window in the front, and a little backyard where I grew some cilantro, chives, and a passion fruit vine that bore fruit all year round. It wasn't much, but it was our little corner, mine and Caleb's. By then I had been a widow for a long time. Caleb's father, David Vance, died when the boy was only 4. An accident at the construction site where he worked, a scaffold that broke, a story that repeats itself in the lives of so many working-class people in this country. I was left alone to raise the boy, but I never complained. God gave me 2 good hands for sewing, and that's how I made a living. I started by doing alterations for people, fixing clothes, hemming pants. Then I got better, took on more orders, until I managed to get a little spot in the Central Market where I sold my pieces. People liked my work. They said I had a good hand, that my stitches were perfect, that they lasted. Soon I started making party dresses, christening gowns, and my biggest dream, wedding dresses. Oh, how I loved making wedding dresses. Seeing the joy on the young women's faces when they tried them on, their eyes shining with emotion, gave me such satisfaction. I never had a beautiful dress myself. I married David in a simple ceremony, wearing an ordinary outfit, but I loved giving that dream to others. Caleb grew up watching his mother work all the time. From a young age, he would sit beside me, helping me sort buttons, put away thread, deliver the orders. He was such a helpful, caring boy. Unlike many kids his age who only wanted to play in the street, Caleb loved books. He read everything that came his way. He'd go to the school library and come back with a backpack heavy with borrowed books. When he turned 15, his teacher came to talk to me. She said Caleb was exceptionally smart, that he needed to continue his studies, that he had a future. I confess, I was scared. Education costs money, and we didn't have much. But my son looked at me with those eyes just like mine and said, "Mom, I want to be an engineer. I'm going to build bridges, roads, buildings." You'll see. How could I say no to a dream like that? From then on, we had one goal, to save money for Caleb to go to college in Pittsburgh. It was the closest big city with an engineering program. I started sewing even more. I took orders even on Sundays. And Caleb, my hard-working boy, got a part-time job at a stationery store near our house. In the morning, he went to school, in the afternoon he worked, and at night he studied. My heart ached seeing him work so hard, but it also filled me with pride. Our routine was simple, but it was good. Early in the morning, I was already at the sewing machine with my black coffee beside me. Caleb would leave for school after a bowl of oatmeal I made for him. A growing boy needs to eat well, right? In the afternoon, while he was at the stationery store, I kept sewing. At night, we'd have dinner together, something simple, beans, rice, sometimes a little meat when we could afford it. And then came the best part of the day. Caleb would pick up one of his books and read to me. Because you see, I never had much schooling. I barely learned to sign my name properly. I could read simple things, signs, bus routes, but books were too difficult. And Caleb had the patience of a saint. He'd sit next to me and read aloud, very slowly. Sometimes he'd stop and explain the more complicated words. That's how I got to know John Steinbeck, Mark Twain, even some foreign authors whose names I can't remember now. My son opened up a world to me that I didn't even know existed. And there I was, sewing and listening, thinking that life couldn't get any better than that. We had our modest dreams. I wanted to see my son graduate, work as an engineer, build important things, maybe even get married, give me some grandkids. Caleb wanted to study, get a good job, buy a bigger house for us. He always talked about a house with a porch where I could put my plants and a rocking chair. "You'll sit on the porch resting after working so hard," he'd say, "and I'll take care of everything." Oh, my son, so many plans we made. This scar on my left eyebrow has a story few people know. I got it when Caleb was 9. There were some boys at school who always picked on him because he was too studious, because he didn't have a father, because his mother was a seamstress. One day I went to pick him up from school and saw 3 boys surrounding my son, pushing him, calling him ugly names. I didn't think twice. I got in the middle of them to defend my boy. One of the kids had a rock in his hand and ended up hitting me right here. It bled a lot. I needed stitches, but I never regretted it. That's how mothers are, right? You throw yourself in front of danger to protect your child without even thinking. I think because of that day, Caleb became even more attached to me. He saw what I was capable of doing for him, how much I loved him, and he returned it in the same way. He never gave me any trouble, never talked back, never went out into the world getting into trouble like so many of my neighbors' kids did. My boy was responsible, studious, respectful. Everyone in the neighborhood admired him. They said he would go far. Even the owner of the stationery store where he worked always told me, "Mrs. Vance, this son of yours is going to be a great man someday." Mark my words. 1992 was Caleb's last year of high school. In December, he was going to graduate, and we were already making plans for him to go to Pittsburgh the following year. I had saved a little money, not much, but enough for a start. He had taken the college entrance exams and was confident he would pass. It was only a matter of time until our dreams started to become a reality. Life finally seemed to be working out after so much struggle, until that day came, the 17th of October, 1992, a Thursday like any other. Caleb left for school early in the morning with his backpack on, gave me a kiss on the forehead, as he always did. "I'll be back later, Mom. I'm not going to the stationery store today because I have a group project for school." That was the last time I heard my son's voice, the last time I felt his warmth near me. If I had known, oh my God, if I had known, I would have grabbed him and not let him leave. When 6 o'clock in the evening came and Caleb hadn't returned, I started to worry. It wasn't like him to be late without letting me know. 7 o'clock, nothing. 8 o'clock, I started going to his friends' houses to ask if they had seen my son. Nobody knew anything. The group project had ended at 5, and Caleb had left alone because he lived farther than the others. I went to the school. It was already closed. I walked the streets of the path he took every day, asking everyone. Nothing. I stayed up all night, praying for my son to appear. In the morning, I went to the police station to file a missing persons report. The officer didn't even look up from his paper. "Ma'am, teenagers run away from home all the time. He'll be back soon. Probably went off after some girl or to drink." I wanted to scream in his face that he didn't know my son, that Caleb wasn't like that, but I swallowed my tears and left, continuing my search alone. 2 days passed. I didn't eat, didn't sleep, didn't stop for a minute. I walked every corner of Scranton, showed his picture to everyone. I begged for information. On the 3rd day, I received the visit no mother ever wants. 2 police officers at my door. Serious faces. "Are you Eleanor Vance, Caleb's mother?" When I confirmed, one of them said, "We've found a body that might be your son's. You need to come and identify him." Can you imagine what it's like to identify your own son on a cold morgue table? They say you shouldn't look, but I did. I saw my boy lying there, pale, cold, with marks all over his body. The face, that beautiful face I knew better than my own, was bruised, disfigured in some places. But the eyes. When the medical examiner lifted his eyelids to show me, I recognized them instantly, the same eyes that had the same shape as mine. It was him. It was my Caleb. I don't know how I didn't die right there. I felt as if they had ripped my heart out of my chest with their bare hands. I fell to the floor of the morgue, screaming my son's name, begging God for it to be a mistake, for him to wake up. The staff had to hold me, drag me out. They told me later that I had a nervous breakdown, that I spent days saying nonsensical things, that I had to take medication to calm down. I don't remember any of that. I only remember the cold I felt, a cold that entered my body that day and has never completely left. The medical examiner's report said that Caleb had been beaten to death. There were bruises all over his body, signs of a struggle, as if he had tried to defend himself. And there were other marks too, things a mother can't even repeat out loud. My son wasn't just killed, he was violated before. 17 years old, a boy who never hurt anyone, who just wanted to study and have a future, ended up like that, thrown in the woods on the outskirts of town, as if he were trash. The police opened an investigation, but from the beginning, you could see they didn't care. Just another gang fight, was what the detective said. When I argued that my son never got involved with the wrong crowd, that he was studious, hard-working, he just shrugged. "Ma'am, sometimes we don't know our children as well as we think." I was filled with rage. Who was this man to say I didn't know my own son? Caleb didn't have enemies, he didn't get into trouble, he didn't hang out with bad company. I insisted, I begged, I made a scene at the station. I managed to get them to investigate for a few more weeks. They interviewed his schoolmates, the people at the stationery store, the neighbors, but in the end, the case was closed for lack of evidence and suspects. As if my son's life was worthless, as if he were just another number in the statistics. For them, maybe he was, but for me, he was everything. He was my only son, my reason for living, my companion, my pride, and now I was alone in the world. The months that followed were the darkest of my life. I stopped sewing. I stopped eating properly. I stopped living. I would lie in Caleb's bed for days, hugging his clothes, smelling the scent that still lingered on his pillows. I lost so much weight that people didn't recognize me on the street. My hair started falling out. My skin turned sallow. It was as if I were dying slowly, wasting away from grief. And I really wanted to die. I wanted to be with my son because I no longer saw any point in continuing in this world. It was a neighbor, Mrs. Schmidt, who shook me out of that state. She forced her way into my house one day. I wasn't even opening the door for anyone anymore, and she found me lying there, dirty, almost faint from weakness. She gave me a bath as if I were a child, made me eat, cleaned the house, and then sat in front of me and said, "Eleanor, your son wouldn't want to see you like this. If you die, who will get justice for him?" That sentence entered me like a spark in a powder keg. It was true. If I gave up, my son's killer would go on with his life, as if nothing had happened. That same day, I got out of bed, took a long bath, washed my hair, put on clean clothes, looked in the mirror, and didn't recognize the woman I saw. 10 years older, thinner, with sunken, lifeless eyes. But it was me. Or rather, it was what was left of me after that tragedy. And that empty shell would have to do for what I needed to do. I had to get strong again. Not for myself, but for Caleb. I started to piece together everything I knew about the case. I wrote down names, places, times. I went back to the school, talked to his teachers, his classmates. I went to the stationery store, to the library he frequented. I retraced his steps on his last day. I found out that after the group project, he had stopped by the library to return some books. The librarian remembered him leaving around 5:30. From there to our house was about a 30-minute walk. Somewhere on that path, someone intercepted my son. But who and why? Caleb didn't have money to be robbed. He didn't have enemies to be the target of revenge. He was just a boy with a backpack full of books, walking home. The more I investigated, the more confused I became. Until one day, talking to one of his classmates, I heard something that caught my attention. Caleb had been acting a little strange in the last few weeks. He seemed worried about something. One time he told me he saw something he shouldn't have, but he wouldn't tell me what, the friend said. Saw something he shouldn't have? What could be so serious that someone would kill my son for it? I tried to find out more, but no one knew any details. It was like I was fumbling in the dark, looking for a needle in a haystack, and the more time passed, the harder it became to find clues. Almost a year had passed since Caleb's death, and I was no closer to finding the truth. That's when I made the decision that changed my life forever. Scranton was too small. Everyone knew me as the mother of the boy who was murdered. I needed a new place where I could start over, where I could seek justice without the pitying glances following me everywhere. I sold almost everything I owned. I kept only a few clothes, Caleb's photos, the books he loved most, and some fabric scraps. I took a bus to Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. I didn't know anyone there. I had nowhere to stay. I didn't know what I was going to do. I just knew I needed a change of scenery to continue my search. When I arrived in Philadelphia in 1993, I was a different woman from the seamstress who had lived her whole life in Scranton. I was no longer just Eleanor, Caleb's mother. I was a woman with a mission, a woman who swore on her son's memory that she would not rest until she found the person who took his life. A woman who now lived for a single purpose, justice. And no matter how long it took, how much sacrifice it cost, I was going to find my son's killer, even if it was the last thing I ever did. Arriving in Philadelphia was like being born again, but born old, already suffering, already soulless. It was a beginning that felt more like an end. I was in my late 30s, but I felt like I was 100. That's what grief does. It ages you on the inside before it wrinkles you on the outside. I rented a small room in the back of an old lady's house, Mrs. Peterson, who barely knew me but took pity on my story. A mother who has lost a son deserves at least a roof over her head, she said. It wasn't much. A bed, a small closet, a bathroom I shared with 2 other tenants, but it was a place to start over. I found a job at a bridal shop in the city center. The owner, Mr. Rossi, was a serious, quiet man who didn't ask many questions. Perfect for me, as I didn't want to give many answers. I just said I was a widow, that I had lost my son, that I could sew well. He tested me for a week, and seeing that my work was indeed good, he hired me permanently. I spent my days at the machine, sewing white dreams for happy young women, while inside everything was black, everything was dead. The nights were the worst. Lying in that strange bed, without the smell of home, without the memories of Caleb in the corners, I felt more alone than ever. Sometimes I would wake up screaming, dreaming of my son calling me, asking for help. Other times I couldn't sleep at all. I would just stare at the ceiling, replaying every detail I knew about the case, trying to find a clue I might have missed. It was like a movie playing on a loop in my head. Always the same, always without an answer. I began to dedicate every free minute to this obsession. I bought a small notebook that I always carried with me. I wrote down everything, names of people Caleb knew, places he frequented, anything strange someone mentioned about the days before his death. From time to time, I would go back to Scranton. I'd spend a few days there just to talk to people, gather more information, see if anyone remembered anything new. It was like putting together a jigsaw puzzle without knowing what the final picture would be. It was during this time that I developed a strange technique that would later save my life. I started paying attention to people's details, the way they walked, the way they laughed, their hand gestures, their tone of voice. It was as if my brain, without my asking, had created a giant file where it stored every little face, every little voice, every mannerism I encountered. At first, I didn't even realize I was doing it. Then I understood it was a defense mechanism. If I could remember every detail of every person, maybe one day I would recognize something that would lead me to my son's killer. I created what I called a mental mural of suspects. Any man between 20 and 50 who crossed my path was automatically cataloged on this mural. I would analyze, compare with the little I knew, try to fit him into the crime scene. It was painstaking work, slow, tiring, and probably useless. But it was what kept me alive, what gave me a purpose to get up each morning. The hope, or perhaps the illusion, that one day, by chance, I would find the right person. The years went by. 2, 5. Philadelphia became my city. That little room became my home. The bridal shop became my life. I made a few friends, not many, because I didn't want to get attached to anyone. My boss, Mr. Rossi, was a man of few words, but he saw more than he let on. One afternoon, after another fruitless trip back to Scranton, I must have looked particularly broken. I was staring blankly at a half-finished lace veil, my hands still. He quietly placed a cup of hot tea on my workbench. My wife. She loved this kind of tea, he said, his voice soft. She said it helped wash away the gray. He never mentioned it again, and I never asked about his wife. But that small act of kindness, that acknowledgement of a shared unspoken grief, was a lifeline. It reminded me that even in a city of strangers, a little bit of light could find its way through the cracks. I continued to gather information, take notes, go back to Scranton from time to time. People started to think I was crazy, obsessed. "Eleanor, it's been so long," they'd say. "You need to move on." As if it were possible to move on when your heart was buried in a grave with your only son. In 2001, 9 years after Caleb's death, I had almost given up. Not that I had accepted or moved on, never that. But I was beginning to think that maybe I would never find the killer, that maybe this mission was too big for a woman alone, barely literate, without resources. There were days when despair hit so hard that I thought about ending it all, about joining my son wherever he was. What stopped me was the thought that if I died, no one else would seek justice for Caleb. He would be just another closed case, another number, another cross in a cemetery that no one visits. And it was just when I was about to give up that fate, or God, or Caleb himself from above, gave me a sign. On an ordinary day, in line at a pharmacy, waiting to buy headache medicine, it was a small, neighborhood pharmacy that I had never been in before. It was crowded that day, people squeezed in line, everyone in a hurry, and that's when I heard a laugh. Not just any laugh, a peculiar laugh, with a wheeze at the end, as if the person always had a cigarette in their mouth. A laugh I had heard years ago, near Caleb's school, on the day he disappeared. My whole body froze. My heart pounded so hard I thought I was going to have a heart attack right there. I couldn't turn around. I couldn't look. I was paralyzed. It was as if time had stopped. That laugh, I was absolutely sure, was the same one. When I finally managed to move, I turned very slowly, trying not to draw attention. And I saw him for the first time, a man of about 45, well-dressed, chatting easily with the pharmacist. He seemed like an ordinary, respectable citizen, but I knew, my body knew. It was him. I didn't do anything at that moment. I couldn't. What would I say? This man killed my son 9 years ago because I recognize his laugh. Who would believe me? I needed more, much more. So, I did the only thing I could. I memorized every detail about him, his face, his height, the way he dressed, the way he gestured. After he left, still trembling, I asked the pharmacist who that man was. "Oh, Preston, the owner of the hardware store nearby. Good guy, long-time customer. Preston." Finally, my suspect had a name. Preston. I left the pharmacy without even buying the medicine. I went home like a robot on autopilot. I sat on the bed and cried. I cried like I hadn't cried in years. I don't know if it was out of relief for finally having a lead or out of despair for not knowing what to do with it. Because what did I have, after all? A laugh I thought I recognized after 9 years. It wasn't proof of anything. I couldn't take that to the police. I needed more. In the following weeks, I began my own investigation. I found out everything I could about Preston. He had a well-established hardware store, was respected in the community, participated in charity events, went to church. He had been married for many years but had recently divorced. His ex-wife had moved back to her hometown in another state. He had no children. He lived alone in a nice house in a middle-class neighborhood. A typical good citizen that no one would ever suspect of anything. I started frequenting places he went. The restaurant where he had lunch, the bakery where he had coffee, even the church he attended on Sundays. Always from a distance, always discreet. I studied his movements, his schedule, his routines. I found out that he traveled frequently for work, that he had few close friends, that he lived a seemingly normal and even boring life. But there was something in his eyes, something cold, calculating, that only a very observant person would notice. I noticed because I had seen that look before in the eyes of the detective who closed my son's case without a care. One day, I gathered my courage and went into his store, pretending I wanted to buy supplies for a renovation. He served me himself, polite, helpful, professional. Up close, I could observe him better. His hands were large, strong, with thick fingers, hands that could easily strangle a 17-year-old boy. His voice was deep, controlled, and his laugh when I made a silly comment just to see if he would laugh, there it was. That same laugh with the wheeze at the end. I felt a chill run down my spine. It was him. I had no doubt anymore. But what to do with this certainty? Go to the police? With what proof? I recognize his laugh after 9 years. They would laugh in my face, maybe even arrest me for slander. Confront him directly? He would deny it, of course, and then disappear from my life forever, taking with him the only chance I had to get justice. I spent sleepless nights thinking, weighing every option, every possibility, and I always came to the same conclusion. I needed a confession. I needed him to admit what he did, preferably in a way I could prove. That's when I had the craziest, riskiest, most desperate idea a person can have. I would get close to him, win his trust, make him fall in love with me, and in the process, get a confession. How? I didn't know yet, but I would figure it out along the way. First, I needed to transform myself. I couldn't be Eleanor, the sad seamstress from Scranton, mother of the murdered boy. I needed to be someone else, someone he might be interested in, someone who wouldn't arouse suspicion. I started with my appearance. I dyed my hair from brown to a discreet blonde. I started wearing makeup, something I had never done in my life. I bought different clothes, more feminine, more put together than my usual simple dresses. I invented a new name, Claire Monroe. I invented a story. A widow, recently arrived in the city, looking to start a new life. No children. That part was important. There could be nothing that connected me to Caleb or the case. I practiced this new persona in the mirror day after day until I believed it myself. The next step was to get into his life. I knew he needed someone to organize the store's office. I had heard him mention it to the pharmacist. This was my chance. I prepared well. I studied a little about construction materials, about how a store like that worked, about the basics of administration. I couldn't seem completely ignorant. And then, one day, I walked into his store, dressed as Claire, with my hair done, discreet lipstick, and asked about the job. The interview was brief. I said I was a widow, that I had worked in retail before a lie that I really needed the job. He seemed a bit suspicious at first. Maybe I was too nervous. Maybe he sensed something strange. But in the end, he decided to give me a chance. "Let's see how you do for a week," he said. "Then we'll decide if you stay." I left there with my heart in my throat, a mixture of fear and determination I had never felt before. I was entering the monster's den of my own free will. When I walked into that store on the first day of work, I had to hold back vomit. The smell, that mixture of cement, paint, and wood, reminded me of my son's coffin. His hands, when he showed me where things were, made me imagine those same hands taking Caleb's life. His voice, explaining my duties, gave me chills. It was like being in hell, smiling at the devil as if I didn't know who he was. But I swallowed the disgust, the fear, the anger. I smiled back, paid attention, did everything right, because now I was an actress, and my life and justice for my son depended on this performance. The first few weeks were the hardest. Every minute near him was torture. I had to control myself not to tremble when he got close, not to cry when I remembered why I was there. At night, alone in my little room, I felt dirty, contaminated. I took hot showers, scrubbing my skin until it was red, as if I could wash away the feeling of him. I prayed. I asked God for forgiveness for what I was doing, for what I was yet to do. I asked my Caleb, wherever he was, for the strength to continue. It was my own private hell, day after day, but little by little I made progress. I showed that I was efficient, organized, discreet. Preston began to trust me, to give me more responsibilities. "Claire, you're a godsend," he would say. If only he knew I had come from hell, especially for him. I began to learn more about his routine, his habits, his tastes. I discovered that he traveled a lot, especially to the interior of Pennsylvania, including Scranton, which only confirmed my suspicions. I discovered that he was methodical, organized, controlling, that he liked things his way, on his time, and that he had a temper that fluctuated. Sometimes gentle, sometimes cold, sometimes frighteningly angry over small things. The approach was slow, calculated. A cup of coffee brought at the right time, a discreet compliment here and there, extra help after work hours. Small gestures that built an image of a dedicated employee, available woman, a person who could be trusted. It wasn't easy. Every smile pained my soul. Every time our fingers accidentally touched, I had to fight the urge to pull my hand away. But I continued. For Caleb, for the justice he deserved. After a few months, I noticed the change in his behavior towards me. The looks that lasted a little longer, the excuses to be alone in the office, the compliments that went beyond professional. It was working. He was starting to see me not just as an employee but as a woman. The thought made me nauseous, but it also gave me hope. The closer I could get, the more chances I had of finding proof, of hearing a confession. One day, I accidentally dropped some fabric swatches near him, samples I had brought to show how we could improve the store's decor. When we both bent down to pick them up, we were too close. I could smell him. I saw up close those eyes that I imagined were the last thing my son saw. He held my arm gently. "Claire, you are a very special woman," he said. I swallowed hard, forced a smile. "You are a special man too, Preston." It was the first time I had called him by his first name, without a Mr. in front. I saw something change in his eyes. Desire, interest. The door was opening. From then on, our relationship began to evolve beyond the professional. He invited me to lunch, to discuss ideas for the store, he said. But we both knew it was more than that. Then came other invitations, a coffee after work, a ride home, a dinner at a more secluded restaurant where no one knew us. I accepted everything, always maintaining an air of innocence, of a lonely, needy woman who was flattered by the attention of a man like him. Inside, I died a little with each encounter. It was on one of these outings that he finally talked about his personal life. He told me about his failed marriage, about his ex-wife who never understood his special needs. Those words sent a shiver down my spine. He said he felt misunderstood, that few people saw who he really was. "You're different, Claire," he said, holding my hand across the table. "I feel like I can trust you." I smiled. I squeezed his hand back. "You can trust me, Preston. We all have secrets. We all have needs that others don't understand." This opening gave me an idea. I began to create an even more elaborate persona, not just Claire, the widowed worker, but a Claire with a dark side, with curiosities and desires she didn't reveal to just anyone. A woman who wouldn't judge, who would understand things that other people would find wrong or perverse. It was a dangerous game, but a necessary one. I needed him to feel he could tell me anything, even the most terrible things. I needed him to see me not just as a lover, but as an accomplice. The first kiss happened in the store's office after hours. We were alone, closing out the cash register. He came up behind me, put his hands on my waist. I closed my eyes, not with desire, but to gather strength for what was to come. When I turned, he kissed me. His hands on my body, his mouth on mine. I had to fight against every instinct that screamed to pull away, to run, to scream. Instead, I reciprocated. I hugged him, moaned softly, as if I was enjoying it. It was the hardest thing I had ever done in my life up to that point. That kiss wasn't the beginning of love, but the sealing of a pact with the devil. Every touch, every sweet word from now on will be a knife in her soul. Can Eleanor maintain her act, or will she break before achieving her goal? In the following weeks, our relationship advanced. We went out together, had dinner together. He took me to see his house, a 2-story building in a good neighborhood, too big for one person. It was there that I first saw something that chilled me to the bone, a bulletin board of photos in his office. Photos of young men, all with a similar appearance, thin, dark-haired, with a studious look. And in one of the photos, from a distance, a face that looked terribly familiar. I couldn't get a good look at that moment. He was with me, showing me the house, but that image was seared into my mind. I needed to go back there, to examine it more closely. The opportunity arose when he invited me to spend the weekend at his house. The moment I had both feared and hoped for had arrived. I would have to sleep with him, to fully commit to the charade. The thought sickened me for days beforehand. I couldn't eat, I couldn't sleep. How could I lie with the man who killed my son? How could I bear his hands touching me, knowing what they had done? But I had no choice. It was the only way to gain full access to his house, to look for evidence, to perhaps get a confession. I prepared myself like a soldier preparing for war. I bought a new nightgown, something I would never normally wear, but something Claire would. I put some sleeping pills in my purse, in case I needed to give them to him so I could search the house in peace. And most importantly, I bought a small cassette tape recorder. There were no cell phones with recorders like today. It was a simple little device, the kind reporters used. I tested it several times to make sure it worked well, that it could pick up sound even from a distance. It would be my only weapon in this battle. The weekend arrived. I went to his house on Friday night, with a heart as heavy as lead. He had prepared dinner, opened a bottle of wine. It was strange to see this man, who I believed to be a monster, acting so normally, so affectionately. You could almost doubt it. Was I wrong? Was it just a coincidence, the laugh, the trips to Scranton, the photos? But then I remembered Caleb, the cold body in the morgue, the marks of violence. No, I wasn't mistaken. I was sure. I just needed proof. After dinner, as expected, he led me to the bedroom. What happened there is something I have never told anyone in detail, and I won't tell now. I'll just say it was the longest night of my life. Every touch from him was like a stab. Every kiss, a humiliation. I closed my eyes and transported myself far away, to a place where I was neither Eleanor nor Claire, where I was just an empty body, carrying out a mission. When it was finally over and he fell asleep, I cried silently beside him. I cried for my son, for myself, for what I had become in the search for justice, but I couldn't waste time on tears. As soon as I was sure he was sound asleep, I got up carefully. I had hidden the recorder in my purse, along with a small flashlight. I grabbed them both and began to explore the house. First, the office. I only turned on the flashlight to avoid drawing attention. I went straight to the photo board I had seen before, and there it was, the photo that had caught my eye. I moved the flashlight closer, looked carefully. It wasn't Caleb. It couldn't be. The photo looked too recent, but it was a boy who looked frighteningly similar to him. Same body type, same hairstyle, same studious expression. I felt a chill. I continued searching in the desk drawers, in folders, in cabinets. I didn't know exactly what I was looking for. A diary, photos of Caleb, some concrete proof. I found various documents, most related to the store, nothing incriminating at first glance. I was about to give up when I saw a shoebox at the back of a closet. It seemed out of place in that organized office. I pulled it out carefully. I opened it. Inside were more photos. Different photos from the ones on the board, disturbing photos. They were images of young men in vulnerable situations. Some looked drugged or drunk, others were clearly scared. The photos didn't show explicit violence, but there was something deeply wrong with them. And worse, I recognized some of the places. One of them looked a lot like the woods where they found Caleb's body. My stomach turned. I was right all along. Preston wasn't just a murderer, he was a serial predator. And my son had been one of his victims. I wanted to vomit, to scream, to run from there, but I couldn't. I needed more. I needed a confession. In that moment, the weight on my shoulders multiplied. It was no longer just about justice for my Caleb. It was about all those other boys, all those other broken families. My fear grew larger, yes, but my determination hardened into iron. I wasn't just hunting for my son anymore. I was hunting for all of them. From a mother seeking justice for her own son, Eleanor has now become an avenger for all those innocent souls. The burden on her shoulders is heavier, but her will is now harder than steel. The hunt truly begins now, and the prey has no idea it's being tracked by someone more dangerous than he could imagine. The photos were compromising, yes, but they didn't prove he had killed anyone. They could just be sick fantasies. I needed to hear it from his mouth. I put everything back carefully, as I had found it, and returned to the room. He was still asleep. I placed the recorder under my pillow and lay down, knowing I wouldn't be able to sleep. My head was spinning with what I had seen, with what I still had to do. The next morning, I pretended nothing had happened. I made coffee, smiled, acted like the supposedly infatuated Claire. He seemed satisfied, relaxed, confident. That was exactly what I wanted. The more confident he was, the more likely he was to let his guard down, to reveal something. I spent the whole day in this double game. On the outside, the affectionate lover. On the inside, the calculating investigator. It was exhausting, but I was closer than ever to getting what I wanted. That weekend was just the beginning. In the following weeks, our relationship deepened. I practically moved into his house, still keeping my rented room as a precaution. Every night was a new test of my determination, my ability to endure the unendurable. But every night was also a new opportunity to look for evidence, to record conversations, to get closer to the truth. I developed a technique. After he fell asleep, I would start conversations, pretending to be sleepy. I would ask seemingly innocent questions about his past, about his special needs, about his secrets. Sometimes he would answer, also half asleep. Other times he would shut down, saying we would talk about it later. It was a slow, frustrating process, but I had time, I had patience. I had 9 years of searching behind me, and I wasn't going to give up now. At the same time, I continued working at the store, maintaining the facade of an exemplary employee. No one knew about our relationship. He made a point of keeping it secret, which only increased my suspicions. People wouldn't understand, he would say. I'm your boss. They would talk badly about you. I agreed. I pretended I preferred it that way too. In truth, it was better. The fewer people who knew about Claire, the easier it would be to disappear when it was all over. It was during this period that I started hiding recorders around the house. I could no longer rely only on the nightly conversations. I needed to record everything, all the time. I bought several small ones, the kind that fit in the palm of your hand. I hid them under the bed, inside vases, behind pictures. It was incredibly risky. If he found one, I would be finished, but it was necessary, and it worked better than I expected. One day, he found one of the recorders. My heart nearly stopped when he walked into the room holding the small device. "What is this, Claire?" he asked in a tone I couldn't decipher. My mind raced, denying it was impossible. Making up some excuse, maybe. I decided to risk the truth, or part of it. It's a recorder, I answered simply. I record our conversations sometimes. He frowned, confused. Why? This was the moment for my final play. Either he would believe me, or everything would be lost. Because I can't write very well, I said, lowering my eyes as if ashamed. I never had much schooling, you know. When I want to remember something important, I record it instead of writing it down. It's my way of keeping memories. I looked at him, trying to seem vulnerable, insecure. I'm sorry if I did wrong. I should have told you. There was a moment of terrible tension where I didn't know what he was going to do. Then, to my immense relief, his face softened. He sat down next to me, took my hand. It's okay, Claire. I understand. We all have our ways of dealing with our limitations. He placed the recorder in my hand, closing my fingers over it. Just let me know when you're recording, okay? You might think he was foolish to believe that, but you don't understand men like Preston. Their arrogance is so vast it blinds them. He didn't see a woman who was deceiving him. He saw an admirer, a worshipper of his power. His own ego was the noose that was tightening around his neck. Arrogance is the fatal flaw of men like Preston. He doesn't see a woman deceiving him. He only sees an admirer. Eleanor not only escaped danger, she made her own weapon public, and even more dangerous. The game is now on a completely different level. Let's see how she sets the rest of the trap. Some conversations are just for us. I agreed. I thanked him for his understanding. Inside, I was ecstatic. Not only had I escaped being discovered, but now I had a perfect excuse to record openly. It was better than I could have hoped for. From then on, I changed my strategy. Instead of hiding recorders, I started using one openly. I would put it on the nightstand before we went to sleep, saying I liked to preserve our moments together. He even found it cute, naive. Little did he know that I still kept others hidden around the house, recording everything 24/7. It was my insurance. If he found one, he would think it was the only one. The others would keep working, capturing everything. It was around this time I started a bolder technique, what I called gradual confession. I began to tell Preston about my own small transgressions I had told, petty things I had done. All made up, of course, but they sounded real. I've never told this to anyone, I'd say after each revelation. The goal was twofold. First, to strengthen his trust in me by showing I trusted him enough to reveal my secrets. Second, and more importantly, to encourage him to do the same. It worked beyond my expectations. Preston began to open up, to tell me things he had never told anyone. At first, it was small perversions, strange fetishes, dark thoughts. I listened to everything with a neutral expression, sometimes even an interested one, never judging. I understand, I'd say, or, that's more common than you think. He felt understood, accepted. With each confession, he opened the door a little wider to the monster I knew lived inside him. A month after starting this technique, I had the first major breakthrough. We were lying in bed after one of our encounters. I had just told him another of my confessions, this time about how I had supposedly stolen money from a former employer. He listened in silence, then was thoughtful for a while. You know, Claire, he said finally, sometimes I also do things people wouldn't understand. My heart sped up, but I kept my face calm. What kind of things? I have impulses, he continued. I've always had them, since I was young. Impulses I can't control. I put on my most understanding expression. We all have impulses, Preston. It's part of being human. He shook his head. Not like mine. Mine are different. He paused, as if deciding whether to continue. I touched his face gently, encouraging him. You can tell me anything. I won't judge. And then he told me. Not everything, not all at once, but enough for me to be sure I was on the right track. He talked about encounters with young men, about how sometimes those encounters got out of control. He didn't explicitly confess to any murders, but the implication was there. He mentioned Scranton. He mentioned schools. He mentioned accidents he had to clean up. I listened, nodded, occasionally asking a question that seemed empathetic, but was actually seeking more details. The recorder captured everything. Every night was a new piece of the puzzle. Slowly, Preston revealed more and more. How he chose his victims, always studious boys from simple families. How he approached them offering rides, help with school supplies, small gifts. How he gained their trust before he attacked. It was sick, revolting. Every word tore me apart, especially knowing my Caleb probably went through the same thing, but I couldn't show it. I had to keep being the understanding Claire, the confidant, the accomplice. I figured I would need a few more months to get a full confession, but fate sped things up in a way I didn't expect. One day, Preston surprised me with a request. He wanted me to accompany him on a trip to Scranton. "I have business there," he said, "and I want to show you the city." It was like being struck by lightning. Scranton, my city, the place where I lost my son, the place where he probably killed him, and now he wanted to take me there, not knowing who I really was. I accepted, of course. It was a unique opportunity. Maybe there, revisiting the scene of the crime, he would open up completely. Maybe he would finally confess everything. I prepared meticulously for this trip. In addition to the recorders, I brought a small camera. I didn't know what I would find there, but I wanted to be ready to document any proof. The risk was enormous. Someone in Scranton could recognize me, ruining the whole charade. But I had to risk it for justice, for Caleb. The trip was scheduled for 2 weeks later. As the day approached, I intensified my confession sessions with Preston. Every night I tried to push him a little further, a little closer to the complete truth. And it was on one of those nights, when I least expected it, that it all happened. We were in bed, as usual. I had just finished telling another fabricated confession, something about having wished death upon someone who had wronged me. He was silent for a while after my story, and I knew this was my moment. I had to push. "You know," I began, my voice a conspiratorial whisper, "that man I told you I wished dead? Sometimes I think about what I would have done if I had the chance. How I would have made it look like an accident. How I would have made sure no one ever connected it to me. Is that terrible of me?" I looked at him, my eyes wide with feigned vulnerability. I was giving him permission. I was showing him I was one of him. He looked back, a slow, predatory smile spreading across his face. "Terrible? No, Claire. It's smart." He took a long drag from his cigarette. "It reminds me of a time in Scranton. A boy I had to get rid of. He saw something he shouldn't have. My heart hammered against my ribs, but my face was a mask of fascinated curiosity. "You had to?" I asked, my voice barely a breath. "What happened?" And he told me. He told me everything. "I've killed a boy in Scranton," he said, his voice so casual it was as if he were saying he'd had a cup of coffee. His words entered my ears and hit my heart like a bullet. It was the confirmation I had been seeking for 9 years. My entire body wanted to react, to scream, to cry, to hit him, but I couldn't. I had to keep being Claire for a little longer. "Really?" I managed to say, controlling every muscle in my face to hide the earthquake happening inside me. "How did that happen?" I tried to sound curious, not horrified, interested, not vengeful. It was the most difficult role I have ever had to play. Preston shifted in bed, lit a cigarette habit I hated, but which Claire tolerated with an understanding smile. The smoke rose in spirals in the dark room, lit only by the faint lamp on the nightstand. Beside it, the recorder continued to spin, capturing every word that came out of his mouth. "It was a few years ago," he began, blowing out the smoke slowly. "In Scranton itself, a kid, a real brainy type, one of those who's always carrying books. Must have been about 17. My heart pounded. It was Caleb. It had to be. I had been watching him for weeks, always on the same path from school to home, alone. I closed my eyes for a moment, pretending I was just listening intently, but it was really to hold back the tears that threatened to fall. When I opened them again, he was continuing his story as if it were just any old tale. That day I offered him a ride, said I knew his father. A lie, of course, but it worked. He got in the car. Preston took another drag from his cigarette, thoughtful. He was a good-looking boy, polite. You could tell he came from a simple family, but he had manners, the type I like. Every word was like a knife being buried in my chest. My son, in his final moments of life, getting into this monster's car, polite as he always was, trusting, innocent. I wanted to scream, but I bit the inside of my lip until I tasted blood. The plan was just to have a little fun and let him go, Preston continued. But the kid was too smart. He figured out what I wanted to do, started to fight, to scream. He paused, as if reliving the scene in his memory. I had to hit him to calm him down. Too hard, I think. And then, well, then I had to solve the problem for good. Solve the problem? I asked, in a voice that didn't sound like mine, so calm, so controlled, when inside I was dying all over again. I killed him, he said simply, couldn't leave a witness. Besides, he had seen my face, knew who I was. Too risky. He talked about taking my son's life, like someone talking about killing a cockroach. I hid the body in some woods on the edge of town. No one ever suspected me. At that moment, he said something that definitively confirmed he was talking about Caleb. The funny thing is, the kid had this little mother who came to defend him one day at school. I saw it from a distance, a fiery little woman who stood up to some kids who were teasing her son. She got hit with a rock and got a scar on her eyebrow. He laughed, that wheezing laugh I would recognize among 1,000. Life's ironic. The woman risked herself to protect her son, and in the end, she wasn't even there when he really needed her. Even now, telling this story, that scar above my eyebrow still throbs. He used my own love for my son to mock me, never knowing that very same love was what was recording his every word. It was a living hell, to lie there and listen, and to know you had to turn your own pain into a weapon. There is no hell that can compare. To listen to your enemy recount his crime against your own son, and have to turn that pain into a weapon. Eleanor got what she wanted, the confession. But now that she has it, what will she do next to ensure justice is served while preserving her own life? It's not over yet. The scar on my eyebrow felt like it was on fire. He had seen me that day. He had been watching Caleb for much longer than I had imagined. Maybe he had even seen me looking for my son after he disappeared. And now he was here, in bed with me, telling me all of this, without knowing who I really was. Weren't you afraid they'd find out? I asked, swallowing my disgust, my anger, my pain. Who was going to find out? He shrugged. The Scranton police? Those incompetents barely investigated. And even if they did, they had no way to connect me to the crime. I was careful. He paused, putting out the cigarette. Besides, he was just some poor kid. A nobody. A nobody. My son, my Caleb, the boy who dreamed of being an engineer, who taught me to read, who wanted to give me a house with a porch. A nobody, according to this monster. I felt something change inside me at that moment. The pain gave way to a cold, calculating certainty. I was going to make him pay, not just for the confession I already had on tape, but for every word of contempt that came out of his mouth. Were there others? I asked, as if we were just chatting about past conquests. I needed to know everything, record everything. A few, he admitted, turning to look at me with renewed interest, as if my curiosity excited him. 2 before that one in Scranton, and 3 after. 6. 6 boys like my Caleb, 6 families destroyed, 6 mothers who were perhaps still waiting for justice, just as I had waited for so long. Preston kept talking, detailing other crimes, each one more horrific than the last. He spoke with a pleasure, as if he could finally share his true self with someone, and I listened, recorded, collected every word, every admission. It was evidence. It was the justice I had sought for so long. But then something changed. He suddenly stopped talking and stared at me intently. "You're acting strange, Claire," he said, in a tone that made my blood run cold. "When I talk about these things, I see something in your eyes, something different." My heart almost stopped. I had let my guard down, let the hatred, the disgust, the pain show through. I needed to fix this, fast. "It's just that I've never met anyone like you," I replied, forcing admiration into my voice. Someone so free from the rules that bind ordinary people. I touched his face, though every fiber of my being screamed to pull back. It fascinates me to hear your stories. It makes me feel special that you trust me. He seemed to relax a little, but there was still suspicion in his eyes. Why are you recording all of this, Claire? Is it really just because you can't write? The question came with a veiled threat. If I answered wrong, I might not leave that room alive. It's more than that, I admitted, deciding to risk a half-truth. I like hearing your voice telling these things. It gives me a different kind of pleasure. I forced a mischievous smile. I listen to it when you're not here. It makes me feel connected to you, to your power. It was the right thing to say. I saw his ego swell with my words. The predator in Preston loved the idea of having not just a confidant, but an admirer. Someone who found him powerful, not monstrous. Someone who kept his confessions like trophies, not evidence. You really are special, Claire, he said, pulling me closer. I've never met a woman like you. He kissed me, and it was all I could do not to vomit in his mouth. Instead, I responded with false passion. Maybe we should make this official, he continued when we separated. What do you think about marriage? The shock almost made me lose my composure. Marriage? He was asking me to marry him after confessing to killing 6 young men, including my son. The irony was so perverse it bordered on the absurd, but it was also an opportunity. If I accepted, I would gain more time to organize the evidence, to prepare my escape, to ensure he would pay for everything. Would it be a dream? I replied, with tears in my eyes. Real tears, but not for the reason he thought. I never imagined I would find someone who understood me so completely. Preston smiled, satisfied. We'll go to Scranton next week, as planned. While we're there, I'll buy a ring. We can even visit that patch of woods. It would be nostalgic. He laughed at his own sick joke. That night, after he fell asleep, I couldn't close my eyes. I stared at the ceiling, planning every step of what was to come. I had gotten what I wanted, the recorded confession, but it wasn't enough to just hand the tapes over to the police. I needed to ensure he would be arrested, that there would be no escape, and more importantly, I needed to ensure my own safety. If Preston found out who I really was before I acted, I wouldn't live to tell this story. The next day, I began to implement the final phase of my plan. First, I made copies of the tapes. I didn't trust having only one version of each recording. I hid them in different places, one in my rented room, another in the false bottom of my work bag, another buried in a plant pot at Mrs. Peterson's house, my landlady. If one was found, the others would be safe. At the same time, I continued to play the part of the infatuated and admiring Claire. I spoke of the wedding with excitement, made plans, discussed details. Preston was so caught up in the idea that his suspicion from the night before seemed to have completely vanished. Men like him are like that, so self-centered they can't imagine being deceived. The week passed in a blur of double preparations. On the outside, preparations for the trip to Scranton and the possible engagement. On the inside, preparations to destroy Preston and flee before he could find me. I knew that once the tapes were handed over to the police, my life as Claire would be over. I would have to disappear, start over somewhere else, with another name perhaps. But I didn't care. I just wanted justice for Caleb. 2 days before the scheduled trip, Preston told me something that changed my plans. I've been thinking, Claire, he commented as we had dinner. After we get married, you won't need to work anymore. You can stay home and take care of everything. He smiled as if he were offering me the world. And you also won't need that little room you rent anymore. We can go get your things tomorrow. I froze inside. My little room was my sanctuary, the only place where I could be myself, where I kept some of the evidence against him. If Preston went there, he would see things that Claire wouldn't have. Photos of Caleb hidden in a Bible, newspaper clippings about the case, notes in my real handwriting, not the one I used as Claire. It would be the end. We don't need to rush, I replied, trying to sound casual. We can sort that out after the trip. Besides, I've already paid for the whole month. He frowned. What are you afraid of, Claire? Don't you trust me? There was a dangerous tone in his voice. The suspicion was returning. "Is there something in that room you don't want me to see?" "Of course not." I forced a laugh. "It's just that. Well, it's embarrassing. The place is very simple, very poor. I didn't want you to see how I lived before." He seemed to accept the explanation, but I realized something had changed. His gaze had a calculating glint that wasn't there before. "All right," he finally said. "After the trip, then." That night, while he slept, I made a decision. I couldn't wait any longer. I couldn't risk him discovering everything before I acted. I needed to hand the tapes over to the police immediately before the trip to Scranton. The next day, I asked to leave work early, claiming I needed to buy a few things for the trip. Preston agreed, still seeming slightly suspicious, but he didn't say anything. As soon as I left the store, I went straight to my room. I gathered all the evidence I had there. The tapes, the photos of Caleb, my real documents, a little money I had saved for emergencies. I put everything in a bag and left, leaving behind clothes and personal items that Claire would use, but that Eleanor no longer needed. My next step was the riskiest. I couldn't just take the tapes to the Philadelphia police station. Preston had connections there. He could be warned. Besides, I didn't trust the local police after what had happened in Scranton. I needed someone from the outside, someone who couldn't be bought or intimidated. Luckily, I knew an FBI team was in town investigating a smuggling ring. I had read about it in the newspaper days before. They were staying at a hotel downtown. I decided they would be the ones to receive my evidence. I arrived at the hotel in the late afternoon. I was nervous, sweating, looking over my shoulder every minute, afraid of seeing Preston following me. At the reception, I asked for the federal agents. The receptionist, suspicious, didn't want to give me any information. I insisted, said I had evidence of a serious crime. Finally, he made a call to one of the rooms. A few minutes later, a man in a suit came down to the lobby. He had a stern face, the tired eyes of someone who has seen too many bad things in his life. "I'm Agent Callahan," he said curtly. "They said you have information about a crime?" "Not here," I replied, looking around nervously. "Can we talk in private?" He led me to a small meeting room in the hotel. When we were alone with the door closed, I put the bag on the table and began to take out the tapes. "What is this?" he asked, still suspicious. "Recordings," I explained, "of a man confessing to 6 murders. One of them was my son." Agent Callahan looked at me more closely now. "Who are you? And how did you get these recordings?" And then I told him everything, from the beginning. The murder of Caleb, the botched investigation, my move to Philadelphia, the discovery of Preston, my plan to get close to him, the months pretending to be Claire, the hidden recordings, the final confession. I spoke non-stop for almost an hour, pouring out years of pain, of searching, of pretending. When I finished, I was exhausted, as if I had run a marathon. The agent was silent for a long time, studying me. I thought he didn't believe me, that he was going to send me away, that all my sacrifice had been in vain. After all she has done, after becoming hunter, judge, and executioner herself, Eleanor's fate and the justice for Caleb now lie in the hands of a stranger. Will the system that failed her once trust her this time? Let's hold our breath and wait for the agent's decision. Then he took a tape player from one of the desk drawers and put in one of the tapes. We listened together to Preston's voice confessing to the murder of the brainy kid in Scranton. The agent's expression hardened. "What you did was extremely dangerous," he said finally. "You could have been killed." "I didn't care," I answered honestly. "After I lost my son, my life didn't have much value. I just wanted justice." He nodded as if he understood. "I'll need you to make a formal statement, and we'll need your help to identify this man for the arrest." "I can't be seen," I said, suddenly alarmed. "If he sees me? If he finds out who I really am?" "I understand your concern," the agent interrupted me. "But we need to do this by the book. If you want him to be convicted, you will have to testify at some point." I knew he was right, but the fear was real. Preston had killed 6 people that I knew of, maybe more. He was smart, calculating, had connections. If he found out about my involvement before he was arrested, I would be the next victim. What if he runs? I asked. What if he's warned? Agent Callahan thought for a moment. We'll do this. You will come with us right now to give a formal statement. In the meantime, we'll put men on surveillance of this Preston. As soon as we have your recorded testimony, we'll make the arrest. He won't have time to flee or prepare. It was a reasonable plan, but there was still one problem. He's expecting me to come back to his house tonight. If I don't show up, he'll get suspicious. Do you have a safe place to stay? A friend? A relative? I thought of Mrs. Peterson, my landlady. She was discreet, trustworthy. I do, I replied. Then here's what we'll do. You'll go to this safe place after giving your statement. Do not contact this man. Do not answer his calls. Do not go to places you usually frequent. Pretend you've disappeared. In the meantime, we'll handle the arrest. Once he is in custody, we will contact you. I agreed to the plan. It was terrifying to think of Preston free, looking for me, but I also knew it was the only way to ensure he would pay for what he did. I had come too far to give up now. I spent the next few hours at the federal office giving a formal deposition. I told every detail, every conversation, every confession I had heard. The tapes were attached as evidence. When I finished, it was late at night. Agent Callahan personally drove me to Mrs. Peterson's house, making sure no one was following us. Stay here. Don't leave for any reason, he instructed. We'll make the arrest early tomorrow morning. As soon as he's detained, I'll come personally to let you know. That was the longest night of my life. I stayed awake, sitting on the bed of my old room that Mrs. Peterson had kept vacant, looking out the window at every noise, imagining Preston discovering my disappearance, looking for me, finding clues that would reveal who I really was. Every car that passed on the street made my heart race. Every shadow that moved beyond the window made me hold my breath. Mrs. Peterson, bless her, didn't ask questions. She just served me a cup of chamomile tea, put a clean towel in the bathroom, and said she would wake up early to make coffee. Whatever is happening, it will pass. That was all she said before leaving me alone with my thoughts. As the hours dragged on, I thought about what I would do next. When it was all over, when Preston was in prison, when justice was finally done for Caleb, who would I be? I couldn't be Claire anymore. That identity had served its purpose and now needed to die. But I also didn't know if I could go back to being just Eleanor, the seamstress from Scranton. That woman had also died, in a way, on the day I lost my son. Maybe I could be someone new. Neither Eleanor nor Claire, but a combination of the two. Someone who carried the scars of the past, but who also had the strength I discovered during my quest for justice. Someone who could, perhaps, help other mothers who had gone through the same thing as me. Dawn came and went, giving way to a cloudy morning. Mrs. Peterson, as promised, made coffee. I had a cup more to have something to do with my hands than out of hunger. Every minute felt like an hour. Every hour, a whole day. When I finally heard a knock on the door, it was past 9 in the morning. It was Agent Callahan, his face tired from a sleepless night, but with a glint of satisfaction in his eyes. "We got him," he said simply. "He's under arrest." The wave of relief that hit me was so strong that my legs gave way. I had to lean against the wall to keep from falling. Years of searching, of pain, of obsession, coming to an end with those 3 simple words: he's under arrest. "How did it go?" I managed to ask after a moment. "We surrounded his house at dawn. He didn't resist. I think he was more worried about where Claire had gotten to." The agent paused. "We found things in his house, Mrs. Vance. Things that confirm everything you told us. Photos, souvenirs from his victims, even a diary with dates, names, details." I felt a shiver. All that time, while I was collecting evidence against him, Preston was keeping his own records of his crimes. He was so arrogant, so sure of his impunity, that he didn't even bother to hide his tracks. Did he ask about me? I wanted to know. Did he ask about Claire? Yes. He said you were his fiancée, that we should notify you. The agent smiled humorlessly. He's in for a surprise when he finds out who Claire really is. The trial was a blur of legal arguments and horrifying evidence. I attended every day, disguised as a different woman, sitting in the back of the courtroom. The tapes were the centerpiece of the prosecution's case. Hearing Preston's voice fill that silent room, casually recounting his atrocities, was both sickening and validating. He never recognized me. He would scan the crowd, perhaps looking for Claire, the woman he thought was his admiring accomplice, never knowing she was there as Eleanor, the mother whose heart he had broken, watching him be sentenced to life in prison without parole. That was the only closure I would ever get. Thinking about Preston discovering that he slept with, opened up to, and confessed his crimes to the mother of one of his victims gave me a bitter, almost sick satisfaction. It wasn't the kind of feeling the old Eleanor would have had, but I was no longer that woman. What happens now? I asked. Now we start building the case. With the tapes, the evidence found in his house, and your testimony, we have more than enough for a conviction. But it will be a long process. He hesitated. You will need to testify in court eventually. Are you prepared for that? To look into Preston's eyes again, now knowing that he knew who I really was. To face his hatred, his anger for being deceived. It was terrifying, but it was also necessary. I'll be there, I promised. Good. For now, I suggest you stay low. We don't know if he has accomplices or friends who might want revenge. When it's safe, we'll be in touch. After the agent left, I sat for a long time, trying to process everything. It was over, really over. I had achieved what seemed impossible. I had found my son's killer and ensured he would pay for what he did. I should have been happy, relieved, at peace. But what I felt was a strange emptiness, like a runner who trains for years for a marathon and, after crossing the finish line, no longer knows what to do with their life. That same afternoon, I packed my few belongings and said goodbye to Mrs. Peterson. I couldn't stay in Philadelphia. There were too many memories there, too many connections to Claire. I needed a new start, a place where I could just be myself again. Where will you go? Mrs. Peterson asked, concerned. I don't know yet, I answered honestly. But when I get settled, I'll send word. She hugged me tightly, this lady who barely knew me, but who had been a safe harbor in my most difficult hours. May God protect you, my child. Whatever you did or are running from, I hope you find peace. Peace? That's what I wanted, wasn't it? What I had sought all these years. Justice for Caleb. So his soul could rest in peace. So I could rest. But as I took the bus out of the city, with only a small suitcase and an uncertain future, I wondered if I would ever truly find that peace. If the scars I carried, not just the visible one on my eyebrow, but the invisible, much deeper ones, would ever stop hurting. The bus departed, taking me far from Philadelphia, from Preston, from Claire, far from the past, to a destination I didn't yet know. But for the first time in 9 years, I was looking forward, not back. My son's killer was in prison. Justice was finally being served. And I, somehow, was still alive to see it happen. In my bag, I carried only a few clothes, my real documents, and a photograph of Caleb, the only one I had kept all these years. It was a picture of him smiling, with books in his arms, the way I wanted him to be remembered. Not as a victim, but as the intelligent, dreamy, and kind boy he was, the boy who had somehow guided my quest for justice from beyond. We did it, my son. I whispered to the photo as the landscape sped by the bus window. We did it. And for the first time since I lost Caleb, I cried tears that were not just of pain, but of relief, of closure, of a cycle that was finally ending. What would come next? I didn't know, but I was ready to find out. They say that when one story ends, another is already beginning. When I left Philadelphia on that bus, I thought the hardest chapter of my life had closed. But the truth is, I was just turning the page to a new beginning. Not better, not worse, just different. A beginning where I was no longer defined solely by loss and the search for justice. The first weeks after Preston's arrest were the strangest. I went to Harrisburg, a city big enough to get lost in, far enough from Philadelphia to not bump into anyone I knew. I rented a simple room in a working-class neighborhood and tried to adjust to the idea that I no longer had to pretend. I no longer had to be Claire. I no longer had to endure that man's touch. But the body and mind have their own memory, you know? Sometimes I would wake up in the middle of the night in a panic, thinking I had lost a tape, that he had discovered everything, that he was coming after me. I got a job in a small notions shop. No sewing this time, just selling thread, buttons, zippers. Simple work that didn't require much thought, which was good during that period when my thoughts were all jumbled. The owner, Mr. Feldman, was an elderly man who didn't ask many questions, just wanted someone honest and punctual. Perfect for me at that moment. 3 months after the arrest, I received a visit from Agent Callahan. He had located me through Mrs. Peterson, whom I had given permission to pass on my address if the police needed it. "The trial is about to start," he informed me. "We need your testimony." I felt a pit in my stomach. It was one thing to hand over the tapes and evidence. It was another thing entirely to face Preston face to face, to tell a courtroom full of people what I had done, how I had deceived him, how I had, well, slept with my own son's killer. It wasn't just shame, it was fear too. Fear of how he would react upon seeing me, knowing that the woman he had planned to marry was, in fact, the mother of one of his victims. "I can't," I responded to the agent. "If he sees me, if he knows who I am." Agent Callahan sighed as if he had expected this response. "Mrs. Vance, I understand your fear, but without your testimony, it will be harder to ensure he gets the maximum sentence. The tapes are strong evidence, but the defense is already trying to invalidate them, claiming they were obtained under duress." "Duress?" I repeated, incredulous. "I was the one under duress. I was the one who had to." "I know," he interrupted me gently. "But without you there to explain how you obtained the recordings, it's his word against." Well, against no one. I sat on the bed trying to process it. I had come so far, sacrificed so much, and now there was a risk that Preston could escape on a legal technicality. I couldn't allow it. But I also couldn't just walk into a courtroom and tell the whole truth. Besides the risk to my safety, there was the moral and legal issue of what I had done. I had pretended to be someone else, invaded his privacy, recorded conversations without consent. As much as the end justified the means, these were not actions a judge would look upon favorably. That's when I had an idea. What if I don't have to explain exactly how I got the tapes? I asked the agent. What if someone else delivers them? Someone who can't be linked to me or the case? "What do you mean? A lawyer?" I explained. "I hire a lawyer to deliver the original tapes, saying an anonymous client entrusted them to him. He can't reveal the client's identity because of attorney-client privilege, right?" Agent Callahan stroked his chin, thinking. It could work in theory, but the tapes are already in the case file. The police already know it was you who delivered them. "But the court doesn't know," I argued. "And you could, I don't know, omit that part? Say you received them from an anonymous source through a lawyer." He looked at me for a long moment. "What you're suggesting is in a legal gray area, Mrs. Vance. Grayer than a child murderer going free?" He didn't answer immediately, and I saw he was considering it. "I'll talk to the prosecutor on the case, see what can be done, but I'm not promising anything." 2 days later, Agent Callahan returned with a proposal. The prosecutor was willing to accept my plan with a few conditions. I would hire a lawyer to deliver a new set of copies of the tapes, claiming they were the originals from an anonymous client. The police already had my first set of copies, but this would create a new, official chain of custody through a lawyer. The police would then find similarities with the tapes they already had and include them in the case. I would not have to testify directly. The content of the tapes would speak for itself. "But there's a catch," the agent added. "The prosecutor wants you to at least attend the trial. Not to testify, but to be present in case it's absolutely necessary." "He'll see me," I protested. "He'll recognize me." "Not if you're in disguise." And so the final plan was born. I hired a lawyer, Mr. Donovan, who didn't ask too many questions when I explained I wanted to deliver evidence of a crime without revealing my identity. I imagine he thought I was involved in the crime somehow, maybe as a repentant accomplice. It didn't matter. He got his payment, almost all my saving sand did his part. The original tapes were delivered to the police through Mr. Donovan. As planned, they were included in the case as anonymous evidence received later. Preston, already in custody, was indicted not only for the murder of Caleb, but for 5 other young men. The trial was set for 3 months later. During that time, I tried to prepare myself psychologically to see Preston again, to be in the same room with him, even if he didn't know I was there. I had nightmares almost every night. I dreamed he discovered me in the courtroom, that he lunged at me, that he finished what he had started with Caleb. I would wake up in a cold sweat, sometimes screaming, scaring the neighbors in the tenement where I lived. It was during this time that I met Beatrice, a lady who lived in the room next to mine. She knocked on my door one night after hearing me scream during a nightmare. "My child," she said with a kind voice. "Whatever is tormenting you, you can't face it alone." Something in her gentleness, in her genuine concern, broke through my defenses. I told her everything, not the sordid details, but enough for her to understand. That I had lost my son, that I had found his killer, that I had helped put him away, and that now I would have to see him again at the trial. She listened without judging, without interrupting. When I finished, she simply took my hands in hers, rough and calloused like my own. "There are things that pharmacy medicine can't cure," she said, "but nature is wise and generous." The next day, she brought me an herbal tea that she grew herself in a small, improvised garden on the tenement's roof. "Drink this before bed. It will help with the nightmares." The tea did help, in fact. It didn't completely take the nightmares away, but it made them less frequent, less intense. I started visiting Beatrice's garden, learning about the plants she grew. There was something comforting about that little green corner in the midst of the city's gray, something that calmed my turbulent mind. And there was something in Beatrice's simple wisdom that reminded me of Mrs. Schmidt back in Scranton, the first person who had extended a hand to me when I lost Caleb. When the day of the trial finally arrived, I was as prepared as I could be. I had bought a gray-haired wig. My hair hadn't gone completely white yet, though the stress of the past few years had sped up the process. Large, dark-framed glasses, a scarf covering part of my face, clothes I would never normally wear. Not even my own mother, if she were alive, would recognize me in that disguise. I entered the courthouse with my heart pounding. I sat in a discreet corner, far from the front rows, but with a clear view of the defendant's dock. When they brought Preston in, handcuffed, escorted by police officers, it felt as if all the air had been sucked out of the room. There he was, the man who had taken my son's life, the man I had slept with for almost a year, pretending to be someone else, the man whose confessions I had meticulously recorded. He seemed smaller somehow, less intimidating, dressed in an orange prison jumpsuit, without the confident smile he used to wear. The trial lasted 7 days. 7 days of evidence being presented, of witnesses being heard, of arguments being made. The tapes were played in court, Preston's voice filling the room, confessing heinous crimes with the same casualness as someone talking about the weather. I saw horrified faces. I saw tears. I saw people leaving the room unable to continue listening. And I saw Preston shrinking a little more with each new revelation, realizing there was no escape. The defense tried, as expected, to invalidate the tapes, claiming they were obtained illegally, that they were inadmissible. But the judge disagreed. "The content of these recordings is so explicit, so detailed, that it leaves no doubt as to the defendant's guilt," he declared. Furthermore, the physical evidence found at the accused's home corroborates every recorded confession. That physical evidence, the souvenirs Preston kept from his victims, the macabre diary where he recorded his crimes, was the final nail in his coffin. Even without my direct testimony, there was more than enough proof to convict him. On the 7th day, the verdict was pronounced. Guilty of 6 murders, sentenced to 30 years for each, 180 years in total, with no possibility of parole. When the judge announced the sentence, I felt a strange sensation in my chest. It wasn't quite relief, nor happiness, not even satisfied revenge. It was closure, like a book that finally reaches its last page after a long and painful story. I looked at Preston one last time as they led him away. For a moment, our eyes met them looking around the room, perhaps searching for a friendly face or just registering the faces that had witnessed his downfall. Me, protected by my disguise, invisible to him, just as I had been invisible for so long to the system that should have brought justice for my son. I left the courthouse and walked for hours, with no destination. For 9 years, my life had a single burning focus: find him. For almost a year after that, it was destroy him. Now, he was gone. The fire that had consumed me was suddenly extinguished, and what was left was a chilling emptiness. Justice had been served, but it hadn't brought Caleb back. It hadn't erased the things I had to do. I looked at my hands, the hands of a seamstress, the hands of a lover, the hands of a hunter, for the first time in a decade, I had no idea what they were supposed to do next. They say revenge is a dish best served cold, but they don't tell you about the emptiness after the meal. The fire consumes your enemy, yes, but it also consumes a part of you. And when there's nothing left but ashes, you have to learn how to find life sprouting from them. I left the courthouse that day, knowing that an important chapter of my life had closed, but also knowing that I couldn't just turn the page and pretend nothing had happened. What I lived through, what I did, the lines I crossed in my search for justice, all of it had changed me deeply, in ways I was still discovering. In the months that followed, I fell into a kind of void. With Preston imprisoned, convicted, out of circulation forever, the purpose that had driven me for almost 10 years no longer existed. Who was I now? What would I do with the rest of my life? I couldn't go back to being the Eleanor of before. That woman had died along with Caleb. I couldn't continue being Claire. That had been just a mask, a tool for a specific end. I needed to find a new path, a new identity. It was Beatrice who, once again, extended a hand without knowing how much I needed it. "Come live with me," she offered one day. "I have a small house in a simple neighborhood nearby. The yard has room for more medicinal herbs, and you have a knack for it." I accepted the offer, not just for the practicality, but because something in Beatrice's way reminded me that there was still goodness in the world, there were still connections to be made, there was still life beyond pain and revenge. I moved into her little house, truly small but with a generous yard, like its owner's name. There, under her guidance, I began to learn more about cultivating medicinal plants. Lemon balm to calm, chamomile to sleep, boldo for the stomach, rosemary for memory, rue to ward off the evil eye, according to her. Gradually, that garden became my refuge, my therapy. There was something profoundly healing in putting my hands in the earth, in seeing the plants grow under my care, in knowing that something good and useful could come from these same hands that had done things that shamed me. When Beatrice suggested that we start selling our herbs at the local farmer's market, I accepted immediately. It was a way to make a living, yes, but also a form of redemption. The stall at the market became well known. "Eleanor's herbs cure everything," they would say. It wasn't true, of course. There were pains no herb could cure, but it helped to know that I was bringing some relief, some comfort to other people. And something else was happening there. Something I only realized over time. People didn't just come for the herbs. They came to talk, to vent, to seek not just physical healing, but emotional comfort. There was something about me, about my story that few knew completely, that made people trust me, especially women. Women with looks I recognized well, looks of those who carry deep pain, of those who have faced the worst that life can offer. Women who, like me, had lost children to violence. That's how, without planning it, I ended up creating a kind of informal support network. It started with one lady, Diane, who had lost her teenage son in a robbery. She came to buy fennel for her insomnia and ended up telling me her story. I listened, offered what I could, words of comfort, the understanding of someone who has been in the same dark place. The following Saturday, she came back with a friend in the same situation. Then others came. Soon my stall at the market became a meeting point. During the quieter hours, when the crowd thinned, a small circle of women would form, sharing stories, tears, sometimes even laughter. Because life goes on, because even in the midst of the deepest pain, we are still human. We still need those small moments of relief. It wasn't a formal group. It had no name or set time. It was just a safe space where women who carried the unbearable weight of burying their own children could feel understood. Over time, I realized that the talent I had developed during my search for Preston, the ability to observe details, to read people, to notice patterns, could be used for something beyond revenge. I started paying special attention to the young people who passed by the market, especially those who seemed at risk, the ones hanging out with questionable company, the ones showing signs of abuse or neglect, the ones who seemed to be adrift like easy targets for predators like Preston. I couldn't save them all, of course. I didn't have that power. But every now and then, a small gesture made a difference. A conversation at the right time with a worried mother. A piece of advice disguised as a casual comment to a teenager, an anonymous tip to the authorities when the situation seemed too grave. Small interventions that might have saved my Caleb if someone had made them for him. Years passed like this. Beatrice passed away peacefully in her sleep, as she had lived. She left me the little house as an inheritance, her final act of generosity. I continued with the stall at the market, with the garden of medicinal herbs, with the informal group of mothers who gathered around my table on Saturday afternoons. It wasn't a glamorous life. It wasn't even the life I had imagined for myself before losing Caleb, but it was a life with purpose, with meaning. A life where pain had transformed, if not into healing, at least into something useful. I never heard directly from Preston again. I didn't need to. I knew he was where he should be, paying for his crimes. Sometimes, when the nightmares returned, less frequent with the passing of the years, but never completely absent, I remembered that it was I, a simple, barely literate seamstress, who had achieved what the police, the legal system, all the powerful men had failed to do. Justice for 6 families. Safety for countless other young people who could have become victims if he had remained free. Justice sometimes needs hands that the system doesn't approve of. I once told one of the women from the group who was torturing herself with the impunity of her son's killers. I wasn't suggesting she do what I did. Each person has their own path, their own limits. But I wanted her to know that sometimes when the system fails, we have to find our own ways to justice and to peace. The original tapes, yes, I still have them, kept in a safe place that only I know. What I delivered to the police through the lawyer were perfectly made copies. I didn't mention this before. It wasn't relevant to the story. The originals are mine, my personal testimony of what I was capable of doing for the love of my son. Every now and then, on particularly difficult nights, when the longing for Caleb is strongest, I take one of those tapes out of its hiding place. Not to hear the horrific confessions of Preston. Those are forever etched in my memory. I don't need the reinforcement, but to hear my own voice, the voice of Claire, and remember the strength I never knew I had. And the recorder I wear around my neck has been empty for years. The original tapes, as I said, are stored elsewhere. The device itself is just a symbol, a constant reminder hanging close to my heart. Some people think it's jewelry, others think it's something an eccentric old lady wears. I let them think what they want. Only I know what it truly represents. The unlikely weapon I used to bring about justice, the instrument that transformed my tears into action. I am 71 years old today, and this is what life has taught me. The hair I once dyed blonde to be the bait has now turned white with the years. The hands that once sewed wedding dresses for others, then caressed the enemy, now cultivate life to heal the world. The eyes that have seen hell on earth are now a lighthouse, warning ships before they go astray. Do not call me a saint. I am not. I used my body as bait, used lies as a weapon, and turned the enemy's privacy into evidence to convict him. I am not proud, but I have no regrets. Because if I had to do it all over again to ensure that monsters like him could not destroy another life, I would do it without a moment's hesitation. This is my story. The story of a mother who refused to kneel before injustice, who turned her pain into the sharpest weapon. This story is not told to brag or to be judged. It is a message for all who are listening. Love does not make us weak. It turns us into warriors. Pain does not destroy us. It forges us into the hardest steel. If this story has touched your heart, take action. Like this video if my story has touched you. Comment below, let me know where you are from and what part of this story made you think the most. Subscribe to the channel so you don't miss any journey for justice from these extraordinary women, and most importantly, share this story. Because some flames need to be spread, and some voices need to be heard by the world.